Thanos is a galactic man of mystery. Many fans forget or don't realize there's so much more to his character than just a pretty purple face. The comics provide a ton of backstory and details many aren't familiar with. The Binger wants to show everyone those secrets. It's time to count down the best and most mysterious parts of Thanos. Let's get started. Ouch, sometimes mommy issues are present in any hero or villain. No joke, this actually happened to Thanos. Not to mention, this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's time to break it down. His mother's name is Sui-san. It's a different spelling on a common name, but this isn't a common woman. Sui-san was a true survivor. She helped make a home for her children and the descendants of her kind. She bore 2 children. It was Thanos that shocked her. She saw bad things in his eyes and was driven mad by the sight of him. Hence the title of the entry. We just forgot to mention it happened right after he was born. Being a son or daughter of Thanos is complicated, to say the least. It's never easy knowing your father wants to destroy half the universe. We know that Nebula and Gamora have a complicated history, but it goes deeper than those two. Thanos brings together a lot of orphaned people. Granted, he totally orphaned them, but he tends to overlook that detail. He's basically got an army of adopted children doing work for him. The trouble is, the progeny of Thanos always betray him. Thanos had a complicated childhood. He lived an angsty life, as evident by our first entry. However, he appears to reject a lot of the identity connected to his family's past. He doesn't even go by his intended name. Well, to be fair, he never got the chance to get his intended name. Sui-san was going to name her child Dione, but the sight of him made her change her mind. Apparently, he looked more like a Thanos to her in that moment. It's extremely complicated. Let's just say it's obvious our endgame antagonist clearly had some mommy issues. Like issues that were so apparent, she decided to switch up his name right as he was born. She rejected every part of what she wanted him to be in that moment. From the start of his life, Thanos was put on the path toward a certain destiny. Not even a name change could affect that. We mentioned earlier that Thanos' mother had 2 offspring. These are her 2 biological children. She did a lot of cloning to populate the planet, but her 2 sons were special. In fact, they're so special, they're basically polar opposites. His brother's name is Eros. The name probably doesn't ring a bell to many of you, but trust us, it's important. Eros was actually an Avenger for a short time. He went by the name Star Fox during his time with the group. You may already be noticing it, but clearly his brother is way more of a good guy. Now, Eros doesn't look like Thanos. There's a reason for that we'll touch on later. Just understand that Star Fox had the luxury of visiting humanoid planets and not feeling left out. He's not too far off from a god. After all, his paternal grandfather is Kronos. It's not a name to scoff at, and partly explains why he and Thanos are so powerful. Fans of the Infinity Wars comic series know that Thanos did the snap for other reasons. It wasn't this grand gesture to balance the universe in the comics. That motivation makes more sense, but comics always provide a unique spin. Villains are never the dastardly bad guys we expect. In the case of Thanos, he's just a guy chasing a girl. Granted, the girl happens to be the physical embodiment of death, but who cares? Thanos had a crush on her for a while. In fact, he had such a big crush on her that he attempts to garner her favor by eliminating half the universe. The snapping and that whole catastrophe in the comics comes from that attraction. Death sends Thanos out on the Infinity mission, but the reality is he becomes too powerful for Death to consider as a partner. Once he accomplishes the task, Death actually turns on him. It's the saddest love story ever put down on paper. The Notebook has nothing on that gem. Even the best fall down sometimes. Thanos is no exception. The guy seems unbeatable until he's beaten. Anytime in the comics or the films he decides to make an attack on someone through a henchman or a personal visit, everything works until it doesn't. Thanos has a great many nemeses in the world. The MCU shows us that Iron Man is a pretty big foil to him. In the comics, there's Adam Warlock and his brother. However, his biggest enemy is his own insecurity. It sounds silly coming from a guy who believes he's inevitable, but that plays into it too. Thanos wants to believe he's right. He's insecure in all of his motivations. He was an unwanted child and a misunderstood member of his own planet. He wants to feel secure and confirmed. Believing he's inevitable isn't actually a belief, it's a wish, and a poor one at that. He's insecure about failure, and it produces a ton of blind spots that heroes often capitalize on. For all this talk about mothers and brothers, it's time to get into who Thanos really is. Thanos is actually an Eternal. Fans of the Eternals know that they are human-like in nature. Thanos doesn't look human. Well, his father and his mother, Sui-san, both look like your standard Eternal. The same goes for his brother Eros. However, Thanos suffers from deviant syndrome, which means he possesses the appearance of the Eternals' sworn enemies, but he's connected to the Eternals and their gifts. Even his home planet is a refuge for Eternals. Thanos and Jack Sparrow have something in common. They both spent many years taking on the occupation pirate. It can even be argued that Thanos was more successful. He joined a crew, but wasn't the captain of the ship, he was actually the navigator. Look, this guy can find all of the Infinity Stones, so clearly he can read a space map pretty well. Anyway, he spends years as part of the crew. It's actually not a violent occupation for Thanos. He does his best to remain passive during his time as a pirate. He meets many fascinating people and attempts to find happiness at every place the spaceship stops. Unfortunately, his time as a space pirate comes to an end after a confrontation with the captain. Still, it's part of a longer story called Thanos Rising that's worth checking out. Brace yourself, Farmer Thanos is gone. We're only kidding. Thanos totally becomes a gardener in the comics as well, but that's a different story. The snap plays out differently in the comics, and therefore Thanos reacts differently. He actually uses the gauntlet to take out the Avengers, who come seeking revenge. It's a moment that's filled with carnage that we recommend reading rather than listening to us describe it. Anyway, after securing his spot as a marker of galactic history, his powers allow him to ascend into the astral realm. He can basically project himself as an astral force and leave his physical body. That's what he's doing after the snap in the comics, and it's what causes his downfall in the end. Titan in the film is its own planet. It appears as if the planet is filled with people like Thanos. The exact opposite is the case in the comics. His homeworld is more hostile to him. Thanos is an outsider to a planet made up of Eternals who don't suffer from deviant syndrome. On top of that, Titan is literally Saturn's moon. Imagine having Thanos that close to Earth. Well, that's still pretty far away, but it's closer than the film Titan. Thanos is actually from a moon, and he's not surrounded by people like him. He's an outcast and is pushed into his role as a galaxy cleanser. Destiny chases him by outcasting him from a homeworld that's different from the Titan MCU fans are familiar with now. Thanos is shown with super strength and superior intelligence. He's the ultimate comic warlord with a knack for winning fights. It's amplified when he holds the gauntlet. Again, his connection to the Eternals gives him alternate powers in the comics. He's actually able to communicate telepathically. It's a big reason that he's such a threat. Thanos plays his mind games with his enemies. It's how he stays on top of his opponents. He tricks them and is constantly invading their headspace. Thanos is more like his mother than he cares to admit. He's a survivor who carries on a mission, just like Sui-san did. Unfortunately, his mission is a tad bit more dramatic. Sui-san was the first settler of Titan. Her and her husband Alars, or the Mentor, worked on cloning themselves to populate the planet. It's truly a ton of clones of them walking around. Thanos did something awfully similar in a comic storyline. He splices his DNA to create alternate versions of himself. It's one of those odd times that history repeats itself. There was a time when every big franchise included holiday specials. Marvel was no different. They always had these simple holiday one-offs with some fun trivia and tiny details. One of those smaller panels happened to include Thanos. Turns out Thanos can be a big sap. He actually celebrated Christmas at one point. Turns out he did it for Gamora. Thanos' favorite daughter was hard to persuade. He wanted her to join his side and fight for his cause. One way of doing this was to give her presents on Christmas. Again, it was done for laughs in a special panel from a holiday comic, but it still happened. History will always remember the day Thanos set up a pine tree in his room and gave Gamora a ton of presents. Thanos is a man of science. His understanding of the world is motivated by that viewpoint. Any transgression against the viewpoint would seem alien to him. Hence why, in the battle on Titan in Infinity War, Strange almost gets the upper hand. His conjuring and magical effort would normally work against Thanos. However, the stones were enough of an advantage to flip the balance. Still, we contend that Thanos doesn't understand magic all that well. It's a weak point for a man that doesn't have many of those to go around. Once he knows what to expect, it's pretty clear magic wouldn't fool him. But for the majority of his life, Thanos didn't understand the possibility of magic in the universe. All he saw was power. Okay, calm down. Thanos only sort of lost to Squirrel Girl. It wasn't as serious as it seems. In fact, it actually comes from a parody storyline. We're still going to talk about it though, because it's truly a funny idea. Squirrel Girl is a woman who happens to also be part squirrel. That's the easiest way to explain it. All you need to know is most comic book fans would not expect her to win outright against one of the all-time villains. That reality came to light in a lighthearted anthology, but the truth is out there. If Squirrel Girl was around for Infinity War, Thanos would have lost before he snapped his fingers. No one messes with Squirrel Girl. She's clearly one of the most powerful superheroes. It's clear now that even Thanos would agree with that logic. Well, did we miss any of your favorite Thanos details? Give us your thought in the comments down below. A like goes a long way to helping this channel grow. If you like what you see, subscribe to The Binger to stay up to date. And until next time, keep on giving props to Squirrel Girl and Thanos.